The House settlement is finally approved, and here's why it's good news for Gonzaga.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Happy Monday, and welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first bet of $5 or more wins. Lots to cover today, folks. Yvonnie Ejims and Huijbens both signed their first professional contracts. We'll talk about that. A devastating, tragic injury for superstar Courtney Vandersloot in the WNBA. We'll get to all that to close out the show. Plus, Desmond Claude and former Zag Pavle Stosic found new homes in the transfer portal. We'll discuss that. But first, the big news, perhaps one of the most iconic Friday afternoon news dumps that I have ever seen. For those who don't know, oftentimes PR teams or people will put out news late on a Friday afternoon, evening, when they tend to not want it to dominate the news cycle. So they put it out at a time where it's going to get buried by the stuff that comes out over the weekend. I don't think this was the intention for this, but a decision was finally reached and the House versus NCAA settlement was approved, which means that we are going to see some massive immediate changes in college athletics. We knew this was coming. We knew it was going to happen. They'd been working on getting final approval for a while. There were some discrepancies on specifically scholarship limits and various other things that kind of slowed this process down. But we finally get the final approval on Friday at like 7 p.m. Pacific time, so like 9 p.m. Eastern time on Friday. So a lot of folks just now getting around to recapping this, talking about this. What does it mean? So I'll give you some of that here. We'll just give a brief overview of the actual policies that are going to go into effect, at least what we know, but mostly I want to focus on what this means for Gonzaga. And this will not be anywhere close to the only time we talk about this. It's just kind of our knee jerk. Here's what we know a couple days after the dust has settled on this settlement. So the main thing, the number one thing, the easiest thing, schools starting July 1st can now directly pay student athletes. That's the biggest thing that comes out of this. Obviously, if you're somebody who just knows about NIL and you're like, well, they are paying them. The school's not paying directly. They're getting paid through NIL collectives. And again, this was something that we knew was going to eventually happen, where the schools would just start paying out directly as opposed to it going through an extra third party, which was causing more problems. This obviously makes this process a little bit smoother. Now, the athletes are still getting paid for name, image, likeness. That is still the way that this is being described. They're still trying very hard to stay away from the pay for play style. Obviously, players are being paid to play. Like this is not changing that or anything specifically. It is just now that the school will have money. They will use that money to then pay the players directly without having to go through a third party. Now, there will also be a cap, an annual cap on how much money these schools will be allowed to pay directly to student athletes. That cap will be based on a percentage of Power 5 athletic department revenues. The number is unknown as of right now. Initial reports indicated about $20.5 million per school, and economics experts speaking to USA Today projected that to be a little closer to $23 million per school. And again, that is the maximum amount of money the school is allowed to pay directly to the players, to all of their student athletes, all of them. So if you give $23 million to your star quarterback, you as an institution cannot pay out any additional money to other student athletes. This cap will increase annually by about 4%. And again, we'll start on July 1st. A couple other things to note here. Student athletes can get paid outside of directly from their school. That will not change. You can make NIL deals outside of the university. So again, for Gonzaga student athletes have had NIL deals with like local companies. Ben Gregg was working with a car dealership. Julian Strother was working with a coffee company. Those types of deals will still exist. And in terms of oversight, the power conferences are starting what is the College Sports Commission to police NIL deals. This means that the CSC, which is College Sports Commission, will review these deals through a system that is called NIL Go. If you, as a student athlete, if I'm playing for Gonzaga and I sign a deal with a coffee shop, hair salon, whatever, I'm probably not going to do a hair salon, let's be honest, but we'll move on. You're then going to, if it is more than $600, you then have to report it to this system called NIL Go. Those deals will then be evaluated to determine if a deal has, quote, valid business purpose, and then is within a, quote, reasonable range of compensation. Meaning, if Kentucky signs Tyron Stokes, the number one recruit in the country in 2026, and brings him in, and they give him $2 million of their budget directly from the school, but then he signs a $4 million NIL deal with a local company, and all they're asking him to do is make one appearance for 1 hour and sign 5 autographs. The CSC is likely going to see this and determine that the valid business purpose and reasonable range of compensation of $4 million for 1 hour's worth of autograph signing is probably invalid. What I do not know is then what happens. Does the CSC have power to shut down that NIL deal to prevent Tyron Stokes from getting paid? Those are the questions that I still have that I don't know at this point. Also, what do they determine reasonable range of compensation? I used an extreme example, but there will be non-extreme examples. Where do they draw that line? There are tons of unanswered questions here. And I'm not even complaining that these questions are not answered yet. It's going to take some time to figure this all out. But the fact of the matter is right now they are leaving it very open-ended because making this too complex and too rigid initially is a bad precedent to set and likely would have kept this settlement in just development hell forever. It would have been appealed, and it would have taken forever. So keeping it vague means you can get this thing going and you can figure out the rest of the details a little bit later. Other things, this is a step in the right direction towards collective bargaining, employment, and unionization, which are likely in some form or fashion the next steps for college athletics. In fact, there's a current lawsuit, Johnson versus NCAA, that could rule that student athletes should be employees. That could happen very soon. Employees is a nightmare for administrators, but it is a positive step for student athletes. I think right now the next step, instead of getting straight to employment, will be collective bargaining. Collective bargaining will probably be done as a way for these two sides, the institutions and the student athletes, to come to some agreement regarding some of the more complex and frustrating things currently going on in college athletics, namely multiple transfer portal windows, which I know is a much bigger issue in football than in basketball, multi-time transfers, the 2-year transfers, guys who are applying for extra waivers and eligibility, like cleaning up some of that stuff that is causing confusion and frustration for coaching staffs right now. I think that being done through collective bargaining could be a very positive next step, with employment probably coming down the line, potentially a good ways from now. But I think collective bargaining is the next step. So what does this mean for Gonzaga? Well, I'm going to read you an excerpt from a CBS article talking about the winners and losers in this House versus NCAA settlement. And one of the winners that they listed was Big East basketball. And the quote applies very closely to Gonzaga as obviously a non-Big East school, but a school that does not have football, but has a prominent basketball program. Here is the direct quote. In theory, at least, Big East schools could spend the entire $20.5 million salary cap on just basketball. Or more realistically, spend $8 to $10 million when schools in the Big Ten and SEC are largely in the $2.5 to $4 million range. There has been talk about some conferences trying to instill sport-specific spending caps, but there is real skepticism that would fly sport-wide. Assuming it doesn't, the Big East, along with its schools, that as long as its schools can come up with the cash without the big football-driven TV right deals, could have a significant money advantage in revenue share spending. So basically what this means, Gonzaga does not have to spend half or more of their $23 million on football. They don't have a football team. They don't have 100+ football student athletes that they have to give money to. They can allocate a much higher chunk of their $20 to $23 million on their men's basketball program than specifically their competitors in the Pac-12. Every other school in the Pac-12 as of right now will spend more money on football than basketball. Yes, even San Diego State will spend more money on football than basketball. Now, the problem is just because every program is allowed to spend up to $20 million does not mean that every program has $20 million to spend. And that is the question. That is the challenge. That is why while this is probably good news for Gonzaga in the long run in terms of their ability to have a competitive advantage, it is not good news for small programs because you have to come up with this money. Every school is not being given $20 million to spend. That is not how this works. You have to have that money. You have to raise that money. You can give it to your student athletes, but you do not have to, and you do not just get it to spend regardless. So that is where the challenge comes. That is where being in a conference that is allocating large amounts of money to you is critical. That is why Gonzaga's move to the Pac-12 is valuable, because they will likely get a full media rights share. We don't know that yet. That is what we are expecting, is that whatever amount of money the Pac-12 is giving their programs on a year-to-year basis, somewhere probably in the $10 to $15 million range, Gonzaga, if they get a full share, they will get the same amount of money annually as the other football programs in the league, but they will be able to spend all of that money or a higher chunk of that money on men's basketball. They will still spend some on women's basketball. They will still spend some on baseball, trickling it down to tennis and rowing and the other sports that they have as well. Speaking of that, Title IX is going to come into play here. I don't know when, I don't know exactly how, but it will. Pretty obvious. If schools are paying players directly and they are allocating way more of their money to male student athletes than female student athletes, which is going to happen, 100% is going to happen, somebody's going to file a Title IX lawsuit. It'll be interesting how that goes, because these programs will be able to prove pretty definitively that the student athletes who are getting paid are bringing in more revenue than the student athletes who are not getting paid or are getting paid way less. That seems to go against the spirit of Title IX. And the counter argument would be, well, sure, that's because we're not investing in trying to get these female student athletes in front of fans on TV, things of that nature. It's going to get kind of messy. Don't know exactly how much that applies to Gonzaga specifically, but it is something that will happen and will be a storyline in the very near future with all of this. That's the quick and dirty on this situation. It's good news for Gonzaga in the sense that they will have a competitive advantage over their other counterparts in the new look Pac-12. It is a challenge in the sense that they probably don't have $20 million that they can spend right now, and they're not going to necessarily have that until they get into the Pac-12, and even then, they may not necessarily. But this is still probably not a bad thing for Gonzaga. It's not a bad thing for the future of college athletics. It's just going to get messy and weird and goofy, and things that we're not even anticipating are going to come up too. July 1st, about a month. That's when this thing starts. We'll talk about it more. Hopefully by then we have a better sense of what's going on with the Pac-12's media deal as well. That'll give us some more added context to this conversation from a Gonzaga perspective. But it is a new world in college athletics, and this is a very big deal for the entire sport of not just basketball, but of all of college athletics. Well, folks, switching gears, Desmond Claude finally made his transfer portal decision. We'll talk about that. Plus, a former Zag is coming back to the WCC. We break it all down coming up in just a second. But first, folks, the NBA Finals are in full swing. Every night, as you know, has been delivering highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments between the Thunder and the Pacers. So whether it's a game-winning shot, a breakout star, there's never been a better time to get in on the action. And FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game both before tip-off and live. So with player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. Gonzaga remains steady, plus 3,000 to win the 2026 National Championship. You're feeling good about the Zags in their last year in the WCC. Now is the time to get in while the getting is good. And folks, if you're new to FanDuel, it's the perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet. If it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. So make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, folks, completely switching gears here. Still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast, but instead of talking about the House versus NCAA settlement and what it means for the future of college athletics and the future of Gonzaga basketball, we're going to talk some transfer portal news, couple of updates here involving both a former Gonzaga target and a former Gonzaga player who have each made a decision in the transfer portal over the weekend. We'll start with Desmond Claude, a highly regarded transfer portal target for the Zags and the best remaining player in the transfer portal, by a significant margin until Sunday morning when he made his commitment and is joining the Washington Huskies, Danny Sprinkle's team in the Big Ten Conference. Not a shock. Not a shock. Claude a few weeks ago had listed a top 3 of Gonzaga, Washington, and Alabama. Since that happened, Gonzaga landed Tyon Grant-Foster from Grand Canyon, which many kind of assumed it was an either-or situation for Gonzaga between Grant-Foster or Claude, who are both. Claude is more wanting to play on the ball, be a more pure point guard, whereas Grant-Foster is more of a traditional wing, but they were both kind of being eyed to play a similar role in Gonzaga's offense. So once Grant-Foster was in the mix, it felt like Gonzaga was likely out of the running for Desmond Claude. And then shortly after that, Alabama got the news that LeBaron Philon was withdrawing from the NBA draft and returning to Alabama for his sophomore season. He is a great on-ball guard, meaning that 2 of the 3 places that Desmond Claude, who is known to be looking for an on-ball role, 2 of the places he had on his 3-team list were not likely going to bring him in for that type of role. At that time, we heard Ole Miss was still in the mix and had kind of crawled their way back into the conversation. Oregon had made a pitch and was making a push to bring Claude into the mix as well. So it was like, well, maybe it won't just obviously be Washington, even though it kind of felt like that was the direction this thing was going. And then, yeah, that ended up being what it was. And this is not a surprise for all the reasons we just listed, but also Wesley Yates, who played incredibly good at USC last year. For those who don't recall, Wesley Yates, fresh as a high schooler, was pursued by Gonzaga, ended up going to Washington under the old staff, Mike Hopkins' staff, hurt his foot, missed his entire freshman year, did not suit up at all for the Huskies, then transferred when the staff got fired and went to USC, balled out last year at USC, was one of the best kind of unheralded players in all of college basketball, averaged like 18 a game in conference play in the Big Ten, which is really impressive. He hit the transfer portal, left USC, and went to Washington because they brought back some of the staffers that he was familiar with, I think his cousin being among them. Claude also has a relationship with those staff members and, of course, a relationship with Wesley Yates. So that kind of made it seem like this was a fairly likely outcome for him. UW also has the ability to promise him a more on-ball role, something that he was really looking for. Claude would have been a great fit at Gonzaga, don't get me wrong, but he was also a career 27% three-point shooter. That was over across 3 seasons. Freshman year at Xavier, where he had a small role, a sophomore year at Xavier, where he was 16.5 points per game, one of the best players in the Big East. And then last year at USC, when he also averaged about 16 points per game as well. So 2 full seasons where he was a high level 15 plus per game scorer, and the dude's still 27% from 3. I think that would have been a concerning fit at Gonzaga. Not that Tyon Grant-Foster is a particularly great three-point shooter either, but his length and size, I think, gives Gonzaga something that Claude didn't quite have. While Claude is a better point guard and playmaker and facilitator, Gonzaga wasn't exactly eyeing him for that role. So this is, I don't want to say it's like nothing lost. Claude's a very, very good player, but it was very unlikely he was going to come to Gonzaga once Grant-Foster left. And I think he's a quality fit at UW. He raises their ceiling, or he raises their floor, and he makes them a little bit better, but I don't think that this is like a game changer like UW's now a sneaky contender in the Big Ten. I'd be fairly surprised. I don't dislike their offseason. They brought in Yates and Claude. Of course, we talked about them. They also get Lathan Somerville from Rutgers is a guy that I like, and I also feel compelled to point out that a player transferring from Rutgers to Washington is an interconference transfer, which feels insane to say out loud, even years removed from this conference realignment. They also landed Christian Nitu from Florida State, who's a player I talked about on a recent Gonzaga podcast that I really like and was kind of hoping the Zags would make a push for him as they pursued him out of high school, but he lands at UW. Speaking of former Zags, Pavle Stosic, remember him? He was with the Gonzaga Bulldogs, not last year, but the previous year, 6'9" forward from Serbia. He has now landed at Pepperdine, playing for the Waves this upcoming season. Again, Stosic spent his freshman year at Gonzaga in 23-24. He played in just 14 games, only played 34 total minutes. They all came in garbage time. Finished his Gonzaga career with 14 points, 11 rebounds, and 3 blocks. Stosic didn't commit to Gonzaga until late September. In fact, I know that it was September 23rd that his commitment was announced, because that is my birthday, and I could not believe that I was recording a 1-minute live reaction video to Gonzaga landing a commitment on my birthday. That never felt like something that was particularly likely to happen. That was a weird offseason. They also landed Luka Krajinovic really late in the offseason. It was just a weird one. Stosic, he didn't even get to campus until after the school year had started. Like, he was never really going to be somebody who got a big role right away. Again, he played in garbage time. He hit the transfer portal after his 1 year at Gonzaga, went to Utah State, but then redshirted last year for the Aggies. So now he's joining a Pepperdine team where he's only played 34 total minutes in his first 2 seasons being stateside, but he is going to be much more ready to play college basketball now that he has spent a year on the bench at Gonzaga, got his bearings straight here in the U.S., then spent a full year at Utah State, got to go through a full offseason workout with them, got to go through all of the steps of being a student athlete just without playing in the games. And now he'll land at Pepperdine, the first front court addition for Coach Ed Schilling in the Waves in the transfer portal, third total portal addition, joining Styles Phipps from Grand Canyon and Mike Saunders Jr. from McNeese, a pair of guards. Pepperdine lost their 6 leading scorers from last year's team, a team that went 13-22 and 4-14 in the WCC. Mo Odom hit the transfer portal, went to Arizona State. Stefan Todorovic graduated, and then their other 4 players hit the transfer portal. One of them, Jackson Olvera, landed at Louisiana Lafayette. The other 3, Dovydas Butka, Boubacar Coulibaly, and Zion Bethia, are all still uncommitted in the transfer portal. So that's the update on Stosic. Again, it's a trend we've seen of more intra-conference transfers. I know Stosic technically went WCC to Mountain West, back to WCC, but it's become more common. Obviously, Mike Ajayi kind of did the flip from Pepperdine to Gonzaga. Colby Brooks went from Gonzaga to San Diego. He's back in the transfer portal now. Mo Odom went from Pacific to Pepperdine and now is at Arizona State. This year, Vukasin Masic went from Portland to San Francisco. Those were just off the top of my head. There are many more that have done this for Gonzaga. Brooks is the most notable recent example, who went to San Diego. He's now back in the portal. He is also one of just 2 former Zags with eligibility still, who is in the transfer portal and has yet to commit. Brooks is one of them. The other one is walk-on Graydon Lemke, who drew some interest early in the offseason from Minnesota and Northern Arizona and a couple other programs, but it's been very quiet on his recruitment up to this point. Efton Reed technically in the transfer portal as well, but he's out of eligibility, attempting a lawsuit with the NCAA. We'll see if we get an update on that anytime soon, but I'm not sure Reed's likely going to be in college basketball again next year. Well, folks, Yvonne Ejims signed her first pro contract after she was cut before the WNBA season. More on that, plus a tragic injury update for superstar Courtney Vandersloot. We'll get to that coming up in just a second. All right, folks, segment 3, still Eddie Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. Closing out the show with a couple of updates on the women's basketball side of things. We'll start with Yvonne Ejims signs a new contract with IDK Euskotren in Spain. It is part of the Euro Cup Women's League, one of the top professional basketball leagues that's not the WNBA, that's not here in the States. And look, it's really hard to make the WNBA. And we've talked about this. We talked about this when Yvonne first got drafted, 33rd overall by the Indiana Fever. We talked about this when she was cut by the Indiana Fever, which was unfortunately not a surprise. She kind of made it through the first few rounds of cuts, but there was never really a super high likelihood. I think when the offseasons after the draft happened, the Indiana Fever had 5 players competing for 1 spot. And it was just very clear from being on message boards and forums and things like that. Like, even people who liked Yvonne, she just never had a chance. Like, she just never had a chance to make this roster. And it's unfortunate. I mean, we look at Gonzaga's history. They've had 9 players drafted in the WNBA draft. Only 2 of them have ever played in the WNBA. One of them is Vandersloot, who we'll talk about in a second. The other one's Caitlin Redmond, who played 7 games. That's it. Vivian Freyson was drafted. Jill Barta was drafted. Jen Worth was drafted. Like, there's so many others. Hayden Palmer was drafted. Like, so many of the best players in Gonzaga women's basketball history. Just 2 years ago, both Brenna Maxwell and Kaylin Trung were drafted, and Brenna went 13th. That's a lottery pick in the NBA and the WNBA. That's not even a guaranteed roster spot. Like, that's how crazy it is between these 2 leagues. For the WNBA, only 12 teams. Obviously, they are expanding with Toronto and Portland, and they'll continuing to look to do so. And roster spots, we'll see if that ends up being something that's part of the new collective bargaining for the WNBA, where they might have some more spots. But it's really tough. Yvonne's Gonzaga's all-time leading scorer. one of the best players in women's basketball mid-major history, one of the best players in WCC history, 2,000 points, 1,000 career rebounds, a conference leader in points, conference leader in rebounds, Zags leader in points, Zags leader in field goals, two-time mid-major player of the year award winner, like one of the absolute best to ever do it. And again, it never felt like she had much of a chance of making the WNBA. She was an Olympian. She played for Team Canada in the Olympics in 2024. So she signs a contract in Spain in a quality league. Hopefully this is a landing spot that works well for her, that she can play well over there. You never know, injuries happen in the WNBA. We'll talk about that in a second. And hardship contracts are a thing. But once you go overseas, it's a lot more difficult to make it back and play in the States. But we'll see if that ends up changing for Yvonne. We'll continue to keep updates on her career going forward. Huijbens, the other strong power forward player for Gonzaga women's team last year, has signed a professional contract as well. She signed with Rutonic Stars Keltern in Germany. She's from the Netherlands and played professionally, semi-professionally before coming over to the States. She actually spent her first year at Syracuse and then the last 3 years at Gonzaga, but she's played overseas before. She's played with some of the club teams, some of the FIBA U20 Netherlands team, I believe, as well. So last year for Gonzaga, her final season in college hoops, she averaged about 9 points, 7 rebounds, 2 assists, played 28 minutes per game. Was really good piece for the Zags last year. She'd been 6th Woman of the Year the previous year, stepped into a starting role last year and was outstanding for the Zags. Great to see her sign a contract. Great to see her, back overseas in Germany, a quality league here as well. So this is a good get for them, a good spot for Mod to land. But again, there's a lot of great Euro leagues and they're developing and getting better over there, but it's really hard to follow your favorite players when they don't end up playing in the States. And it's just so rare in women's basketball for them to get to do that. And it's a frustrating thing that I know many people feel when wanting to get into the WNBA and struggling because your favorite players in college rarely make it, or if they do, they struggle because it's just a really hard league. And so you see a lot of people kind of get frustrated with the sport. And again, I mean, I'll tell you right now, I really love watching the WNBA, but there's one player that I really enjoyed watching, and that was Courtney Vandersloot. And unfortunately, we're not going to get to watch her for the rest of the season. For those of you who missed this, Courtney Vandersloot on Saturday in the game between the Chicago Sky and the Indiana Fever, the highly anticipated Caitlin Clark versus Angel Reese game that did not happen because Caitlin Clark is still dealing with a concussion and missed that game. Regardless, Courtney Vandersloot, 5 minutes into the game, suffered a knee injury. It looked bad. She was in very obvious pain on the floor. She got carried away. Everybody feared the worst, and unfortunately, the Sky confirmed the worst with a social media post on Sunday saying that Vandersloot tore her ACL. She will have surgery, and she will miss the rest of the WNBA season. And here's the thing. I don't want to be morbid or doomer style or anything like that, but Courtney Vandersloot is 36 years old. Last year was a full season for her. She missed some time in the middle of the season because she was grieving the loss of her mother. So I think you can kind of understand maybe her stats dipping a little bit, but they did. It was not a great season for her last year. In fact, towards the end of the year, she had been benched, was coming off the bench in the playoffs for the Liberty. And then she signed this contract with the Chicago Sky, kind of resetting, playing for a team that she spent the first 12 years of her career with. But she was brought in as a mentor. She was brought in as a mentor for Reese, for Camilla Cardoso, and for their rookie this year, Haley Van Lith, who of course has a connection to Gonzaga. She's dating Jalen Suggs and also is from Central Washington. But Vandersloot was brought in as a bit of a placeholder for that young core. And now she's going to miss the rest of the year. She's going to have to go through a grueling recovery process. She's 36 years old. She just had a baby, not physically, but her and her wife, Allie Quigley, her also longtime teammate, they announced on Mother's Day this year that they've adopted a little baby girl. I think this might be it for Courtney. I don't think it's going to be necessarily like she's going to choose to hang him up. I think she's going to go through this recovery process. And if it goes smooth and she can come back next year, great. That would be incredible. She was playing well. It's not like she was playing bad this year. She played 7 games with the Sky, one of them being just those 5 minutes. But in those games, she averaged 10.5 points, over 5 assists, 3 rebounds. Those are pretty close to in line with her career numbers, honestly. So it wasn't like she was playing all that bad. But this is a hard injury to recover from. It gets harder the older you get. 36 is not young. It's not young in any professional sport. It's certainly not young in basketball. Maybe it's not it. Maybe it's not. But I'm having a hard time feeling like there's any kind of guarantee that she's going to return. If this is it for her. She's second all-time in the WNBA in assists behind Sue Bird. For multiple years on the show, we've tracked whether we think she's likely to ever catch Sue and become the all-time WNBA assist leader. Even if she returns, the odds went from very slim to basically zero. She's not going to catch Sue Bird. It is unfortunate, but it is almost certainly not going to happen. She needed to have a full, healthy, very good season this year, which she was on track to do. And now that's gone. That's been taken away from her by a knee. And unfortunately, I don't think she'll be able to find a way to get that back. So she'll likely finish second all-time in assists. She's first in assists per game for her career. She's 15th in total steals, 19th in games played, 34th in win shares, 37th in made field goals, 40th in points. She's a 5-time All-Star, 5-time All-WNBA player, won a pair of championships, brought one to Chicago as a team leader, also won one with the New York Liberty. A tremendous player, one of the all-time greats in Gonzaga basketball history, one of the all-time greats in women's basketball history, one of the all-time greats in basketball history, a truly tremendous player who's very fun to watch. I hope we have not seen the last of Courtney Vandersloot playing high-level competitive basketball, but I'm having a strong feeling that at least that there's a pretty good chance that we have, which is very, very unfortunate for her, for Sky fans, for Gonzaga fans, everybody, and for the WNBA at large. It's going to wrap it up for me today here on the Locked On Zags podcast. Folks, thank you so much for making the show your first listen or your first watch of the day. We'll be back throughout the week, continuing our afternoon recordings. We're going to be talking NBA draft, NBA finals for Andrew Nembhard and Chet Holmgren. Of course, draft stuff, talking Ryan Nembhard. We'll talk Caleb Battle, who had a bunch of workouts as well. We'll continue to talk transfer portal. We'll talk about recruiting as we get more updates in that space as well. Thanks again, folks, for listening. Have a fantastic rest of your day. And of course, as always, go Zags.